everyone, and welcome to Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's me, your host. My mission is to bring the power of healing to trauma and abuse survivors. That's why every guest on this show will bring you an amazing story of healing in action. So come on, everyone, let's heal. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. As you know, we are in a series of episodes that I am dedicating in honor of Child Abuse Prevention Month, now in April, and I'm super excited about this series, super excited about all my guests, and today is no different. I have with me my friend Scott Dill, who is the founder and CEO, I believe, of an organization called Braver Collective, which we will talk about. But Scott, let me turn it over to you to do a little bit of introduction, more than what I've done about yourself for our guests.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk about Braver Collective. And thanks for all the work you're doing to support survivor healing.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm the founder and executive director of Braver Collective, which is a nonprofit, which we'll talk thoroughly about, I know. And I'm also a proud husband and a dad and a papa of two beautiful little granddaughters. And my wife and I live in southwestern Colorado, and where we both spend a lot of time outside hiking. I love to fly fish, etc. I'm a former business person. So that was my professional background, and I have been working on Braver Collective full time for about the last 6 years.
Which is amazing, and it's amazing work that you're doing at Braver
Thank
Collective. So,
Thank you.
yeah, we were introduced by a common connection that we have. Someone that I know who also knows your daughter, who lives here in
Right.
Dallas, that introduced us, and it's that survivor healing connection. And so I think it was just so obvious that the two of us should meet and that we
It's
spend a little
meant to
bit
be.
of time together. And yeah, absolutely meant to be. And figure out how we'll continue to collaborate here on this and beyond this is something that really excites me because I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Of course, I'm a storyteller, and that's a lot of what Braver
A lot in
Collective is
common.
about,
Yes.
which we'll come around to. And so that's very exciting about that work. But I also find it interesting the commonality that you and I have that you, I guess 6 years ago, were doing something very different professionally, and me just, I guess it's now been 8 months ago, was doing something very, very different. So finding
Yeah.
our way into purpose is really cool and something that we also share. We'll talk a little bit about that.
Great.
Yeah, yeah. So why don't we start? Why don't you start telling us more? Let's talk more about Braver Collective and the mission, and then we'll backpedal a little bit and talk
Sure.
about how you arrived at creating the organization
Sure.
work you're doing.
Exactly. So Brave Collective is a nonprofit that's been around a few years in the background. We just launched a website in the fall of last year, 2025, which is a site that's designed to basically be a safe, trauma-informed, shame-free place for survivors to come together to help each other heal. So it's an online healing resource, if you will, and a community. So bravercollective.org, no spaces, go check it out. And you'll find us also on Instagram and LinkedIn as well, and Facebook. You know, the backstory on it is that it was all co-created, co-designed and co-created among some really talented designers and a cohort of young adult survivors.
Hmm.
So everything that's present on the site, our mission, our vision, everything about the organization is designed with survivors to help each other heal. So you won't find anything there that hasn't been prioritized as important
Hmm.
to our healing. It's targeting young adults, but I think it's purely relevant to survivors of all ages and backgrounds.
Yes, I completely agree. Having spent some time on the website, I would like to think that I'm still a young adult, and maybe physically I feel like a young adult, but my birth certificate and the date on the calendar today would tell you something different. So I'm not, but I do agree. I think that the information that there is universally applicable to all of us as survivors, and it is a really great resource. Um, so tell us a little bit more about some of the information that we can find on Braver Collective.
Sure. So it's all about the survivor voice and understanding that the survivors are the source of the truth that we follow and our North Star, if you will.
Mhm.
So we have survivor stories, survivors talking about their own lived experience to help us both understand how we're impacted by trauma and then what various kinds of healing might look like. Allows each of us to know that we're not alone and that we're understood in the community of survivors. There are also an expanding array of resource pieces, which tend to be commissioned by Braver to focus on and bring say perspective on different healing modalities, for example, might come from a therapist, or understanding what a healing mentor looks like and what they do might come from someone like you. But a collection of resources for survivors to explore. And then finally, survivor to survivor insights. So just experiences that survivors have, particularly in healing, where they just share those experiences. So it might be a survivor saying, "Hey, I tried EMDR and it was great." And then we would also share a story that would say, "Hey, I tried EMDR and it was terrible," right?
Yeah.
For me.
Mhm.
Because what you know and I know and all the survivors know is that healing is unfortunately not as predictable as we'd like it to be. So it's not, you don't go to Braver and find like a first you do A and then you do
Yeah.
B, you arrive at C, right?
Yes.
It's more around making sure that survivors have information they can trust that's really easy to access and navigate. So if you get interested in a theme, you can follow that through and find more information, kind of lowering the bar, if you will, for all of us to particularly knowing how limited our agency is particularly when we're young, right? And we've done very little healing. So there's a lot of design that goes into just making it easier, basically, to
Mhm.
find what that next step to heal might look like for you, which is something we think about a lot because again, it's not predictable.
Right.
So we have to, it's a matter of of understanding, of being inspired by others, of feeling
Yeah.
a sense of support from the community.
Yeah.
So you have the confidence to move forward in that.
Yeah.
And we just want to have the information there and the encouragement there so survivors who come and supporters who come can find that inspiration and begin to take that next step. I mean, I'm 66 years old. There's next steps for me to heal, right? It doesn't, unfortunately, we don't arrive
We
at
don't.
healing.
No, we don't. Okay, I'll tell my age. I'm 54 and I'm still
Okay,
healing. So
right.
I've done a lot of work like you have to heal, and really a lot of the work in particular in almost 5 years now that I've been really on the intentional, what I call
Mm,
the intentional and focused part of my
right,
healing journey, knowing that I needed to heal and doing the work to heal. But um, that word unpredictable that you use, I think about that in the context of the future and my future
mm,
need to heal because I'm alive. I'm a human being.
right.
I'm still going through
Not
this.
done yet.
I'm still encountering people, and that's what you and I are healing from are things that we've experienced at the hands of other people that have caused us pain, right? And some difficult
Exactly.
emotions that we carry inside of us. And as far as I know, I'm going to continue to experience people for a lot longer to come, right? And so are
Right.
you. But the hope is that we have the tools on board that make us more resilient and we can respond more quickly to what it is that we need to heal from in the future when, and I know it's a
Right.
when for me, not an if, but a when it happens.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. I think developing the capacity to be aware of what's going on with us is a big step, and allows us to shorten the gap between when we're triggered in some way and when we hopefully find a skillful way to respond.
Mm.
but but you know, creating that gap and giving us the time to in the practice to respond more skillfully, I think is an important part of our healing.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. So one of the things that I really love about Braver Collective is the storytelling from survivors. And I think about this in the context of support group. And so I talk about this, I've written about this, that one of the most powerful resources that I had access to very, very quickly after my journey began was a support group in Hong
Mm.
Kong, of all places. I was thrilled to find it, but it was an English language support group for female or femme survivors of sexual abuse, whether that had
Wow.
occurred as a child or as an adult, right? And I was absolutely blown away when I found the group, and it's clearly part of my path. And the
Right.
founder, the woman who created it, is a dear friend now, and she's doing some really amazing work where she's gone. She still has the support group as part of Talk Hong Kong, but they're doing a lot of work around prevention and a lot of legal advocacy work and some really,
Wow.
really fantastic work
Mm.
around awareness and prevention, which I really love that they're
Yeah.
doing. But the support group itself was so powerful to me because I was with people who had shared experiences to mine, and particularly shared traumatic experiences. And
Right.
it's a level of acceptance or
Mm.
a level of knowing that you're not alone, with which, if you're in a place of feeling alone,
Yeah.
lonely, abandoned, which I was, it's a connection there that is super unique. And when it's people who've experienced the same things that you've experienced, there's a lot of power in that sense of aloneness, breaking down that sense of
Yes.
aloneness. And that, of
Yes.
course, was in person. But what I love about Braver Collective is it's almost a virtual site
Exactly.
where you can get that same connectivity and see yourself that you are not alone as a survivor, right? And that is super powerful. And I really love that, especially about the storytelling that is on the Braver Collective.
Yeah, thank you. I had such similar experiences, Beth. I did my first round of therapy when I was in my early 30s, maybe late 20s to early 30s. I'd been kind of trying to push it down and get on with my life up until then, and then read every possible self-help book I could find. I think collectively we're, I don't know, maybe a push or maybe a little bit helpful. I'm not
Mhm.
sure. But I was thinking recently about that work, and it was primarily in a group context.
Mhm.
I was scared to death. I was just like overpowered with shame, and just
First
walking
time I
in
went,
the
I was
room,
too.
it's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And when I wrote down the primary outcomes from that kind of season, the first thing I wrote down was I realized I wasn't alone. What you just said,
Yes.
right? That
Yes.
it's all different, right? Everybody's particular stories, the particulars of the story might be different. How it manifests in our lives is a little different. How our healing might be a little different, but there's so much that's in common. And to know we're not alone and we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
That's
We're yeah.
path may be challenging, maybe a lot of work to do, which there was for me, which I resumed in my early 50s. And, but I think that was, yeah, being in community then was very, very important. I'll say one other thing about community, because I think it manifests a little differently depending on where you are in your journey, if you want to call it that, or your path. I had that experience in my early 30s, and that was the outcome. And then when I was in my early 50s, kind of all through my 50s, I did a ton of therapy with a really great trauma therapist. It's kind of a combination of somatic practices and talk therapy. So a lot of mindfulness,
Mhm.
meditation, again, kind of creating awareness of what's there, creating space to allow it to be there, along with the rest of what's possible in my life. So I did a lot of work there. And then, as that began to really settle, is for me, kind of in a Judith Herman framework. If you think, Judith Herman and Trauma and Recovery, which is a book that I completely love, talks about three stages to healing. There's safety, then there's this really challenging piece around remembering and mourning and working through our story, which was me, again, for me, primarily in my 50s. And then as we move through that, we create some capacity not only to be with our own story, but also to be in community as an authentic person, right? To be a survivor. For me, it was
Mhm.
like, I'm age 59, showing up to all of my colleagues at this big bank in Chicago, telling them I was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and I was going to go out and try to do something to be helpful. That's the way it showed up for me. And it was the very last thing on earth I thought I would ever do. I told basically no one to that point, or just my family and a few people. But that landing in community as a fully authentic survivor with all of what is present for me
Mhm.
has been a completely different phase of healing that continues. You and I had coffee, right?
Yeah.
Healing from that, from me being able to talk to you about my story and listening to your story. And I
Mhm.
totally empathize with you without
Yeah.
knowing hardly anything about your
Right.
backstory, not even needing to know that, right?
Yeah.
But I just think about that in terms of the value of community as we progress through these different phases of our healing experience. And I
Yes.
think that it plays an important role at every step along the way.
Yes, I think it does too, and it's a great point, the community point. You just had me thinking a little bit about that in my own life, 'cause I think I may have shared with you that for many, many years, actually leading up into the point where I really started healing, I had exiled all of my family and friends.
Mm.
And really, the only people that I engaged with on a regular basis were my then husband and my work colleagues.
Mhm.
And I had no conscious awareness of why my life had come to that point. I didn't figure it
Yeah,
out until after the fact, until after I
right.
started healing. I was like, "Oh, that's what I did. I get it." But I that sense of community, like, I never even experienced that sense of community in a healing capacity
Mhm.
that you're talking about until I found that support group
Yeah,
in Hong Kong, right? And I just remember that morning when it popped up on my Google search. I mean, like the sheer like the shot, but like the jubilation, just
mhm,
even seeing it there was
yeah,
amazing. And I think it was that what you're describing, it's that draw of a sense of community and a hope for community, right? Suddenly there is that, hope that I'm gonna maybe find something that's going to help me that looks like me, right? And
yeah,
that's the power of community. But I would say for anyone listening to this, and given what I've shared about not having community in my journey until I found talk, and now of course I create community all the time, my own community, all of
right,
your community, right? I mean, trying to be in all kind of different communities. um, that is, I think that would be a top tip from what we're talking about, right? Is
yeah,
the power of finding that community that looks like you, which we're all trying to do in so many other
yeah,
phases of our life, right? If you think about what we're doing with the organizations we join or the churches we go to or our friends, whatever it may be, right? We're always looking for that. But finding community that is specific to whatever trauma or abuse you have experienced in your life, there's so much power in that very unique connection
yeah,
of the experience that you have with those people. Right?
yeah, I agree totally.
That's top tip from this show for sure.
Yeah,
This
and I
episode.
would say, also what we thought about, what we think about, with the online community that we're supporting with Braver is, the truth that, like, for me at least, in the early days of trying to come to terms with my being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, kind of the last thing I would do would be to walk into some group of other survivors. It took me a while before I got there. And, our
Yeah.
hope is to offer community, as you say, online, but in a way that's anonymous and safe and private, where you can have the benefit of being engaged, uh, however you feel comfortable, to whatever degree. Stay anonymous as long as you want, until you're ready, right,
Yeah.
to take that step. And I don't think there's any question. There's healing in the context to community every step of the way, and we wanted that to start, as soon as possible. I mean, I was this childhood sexual abuse survivor, as I mentioned, and when I got out of my house, I thought I was going to be fine, right? Then I'm like, I'm not fine, and I don't even know like what's going on with me, and I definitely don't know where to go. And of course, that was in the days when we were even, more poorly resourced than we are now. We still have a long ways to go, but we just looking back, to have, if I'd had the opportunity to go to a place that was available, in the privacy of my home, on my phone, whatever the case may be, and just begin to sense that I am understood, I understand where they're coming from. I can see how being connected can start moving me toward healing.
Yeah.
I don't mean to continue down this path too far, but
No, please.
when I was,
Mm,
the circumstance that really got me off the couch in terms of trying to see more clearly the order of magnitude of how many of us are impacted by sexual trauma, and then trying to think about how to be helpful, particularly in the area of survivor healing, was watching the USA gymnast testify against Dr. Nasser a long time ago. It's like January of 18. And a lot of us still remember that. And that was so powerful for me, in part because of the just feeling the power of those survivor voices, and also the community, all of those survivors standing there together, having each other's back, and I know that's continued. I've tracked those folks since then as much as I could because I'm so proud of the work they're doing.
mm.
But this, uh, community shows up in all different forms, as you were alluding to in this space. And I agree with you, to the extent you can dip your toe in the water there and try to find an opportunity to be in a place that feels safe,
Yeah.
then I would encourage that.
Yeah, me too. I think that the challenge, and I certainly experienced this in the very beginning when I was thinking about going. But I mean, when I discovered the support group, it was clear to me that I was supposed to be there. I knew it
Yeah.
was where my path was leading me. Of course, I now very clearly know that, but I felt it then. But there is that, I think part of what the challenge is when you engage with, like when you go to a place like that is,
Mhm.
physically you're going in and meeting with a group. And even if you do it, virtually like this, where you're
Yeah.
connecting with people, you're seeing them, you're there because you're just like everyone else, which is, there's an admission to that, that you have
Mhm.
experienced what
Yeah.
the support group is about, right?
Mhm.
And I've felt this myself. There's that moment, you're a lot of times you're early in dealing with the healing, and so you may not have processed any shame or blame that you have associated with those emotions, which is where that fear comes from, right? Because you're
Right.
now saying, I've experienced this, and if you haven't processed those emotions like I have and like you have, where, at this point I'm like, I that is not mine, right? That blame, that shame is not mine. That guilt is not mine. It belongs to the
Yeah.
people who did those things to me, right? And not
Right.
mine. But it does take time to work through that, right? And
Yes.
you do need to process that. But I just want people to hear, like, if that's, that resistance that's there sometimes, that's where that's coming from, is misplaced blame and misplaced shame and guilt to some extent. We all do it. I'm guessing if you were to poll survivors, many, many, many of us would say that we took on our perpetrators' shame, our
Mhm.
perpetrators'
Yes.
blame, right? And
No doubt.
it's misplaced and not where it should be. And so I'm also saying to all of you, it's not yours. Give it back. You don't need to hold on to it, right? So that you can engage openly to really be able to evolve more in your healing, right?
Yeah.
Be more free
Yeah.
from constraints that come along with being a survivor.
Couldn't agree more. For me, the shame was, I think, in the background until I did started doing more work. I couldn't really name it, so to speak, and understand how it was
Yeah,
influencing my life.
yeah, either.
But in some ways, it was a filter that everything else went through. It was always this concern that people would really, if they really knew me, they really knew I was a survivor, then what would it be like? And, all of that, what I
Can I
conceive
just interrupt you
is
for a
kind of
moment?
nonsense.
People would
Yes.
think that you're very courageous and very brave, very strong, powerful. That's what people
Oh,
would think if they knew that about you, right?
well,
When they
thank
do
you.
know that about you, that's what they
Right.
think.
Well,
That's what they think
that's
about me,
kind, but,
right?
but
It is.
in the season when shame is really, or for me, when shame was really kinda dominating my worldview, I
Yeah.
I couldn't see that either, right? That shame was so much part of my identity, again, kind of in the background subconscious, that that's all there. I mean, it's just very limiting, I guess I would say, and
It
then,
is.
I think what can happen over time is it just gets put in the proper context, right? I mean, to
Mm,
your point, it's not ours. We're the victims and the survivors, and we have every reason to be proud of who we are and to know that we're worthy, right? And that
yes.
shame is like a part of our experience, but that's not who we are.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like it's a transferred emotion, right?
Yeah,
The people that
yeah.
do these things to us
I always
transfer
think of it as a
us.
design flaw. It's like, why does it
It
work
is.
that way? It should not work that way, but it does
Somebody
work that way
it is it is a
consistently.
des it is a design flaw, but somebody said to me the other day that, those kind of emotions, when we carry those kind of emotions, it's almost like the infection. It's like getting an infection from the person, right? And so if you
Yeah,
like, the infection's not yours, right? I mean, you didn't,
right.
right? It comes from, and I was like, "Wow, that is so
Yeah,
true." It is,
that's
right?
a
It's
good
an
way to think
infection,
about
and
it.
you
Yeah,
really wanna get rid of it, right?
right. But it can still make you sick for a while. Right. It can be
Yeah,
trouble. It can be
yeah, yeah,
difficult.
that's
Right.
exactly right. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So the resources, let's talk about resources for just a little bit that are on the Braver Collective website, because I mean, as you've talked about, you're offering thoughts, a variety of
Mhm.
thoughts, on a lot of different tools and resources that are out there, which I think is fantastic, and it's back to what you referenced as sort of the unpredictable nature of healing. And I always say it's not a linear path, right? You're going to
Right.
go all over the
Sure.
place. But what I also say to people is that you and I are individually very unique in what we've experienced. We are
Mhm.
very unique in how we have survived our lives because of what we've experienced in terms of the trauma and the
Right.
abuse. Therefore, the way that we heal is going to be entirely unique to each one of us.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's what this promotion of a variety of resources, organizations like yours, and what I try to promote is just to plant seeds. It's not a guide. It's not, this is how I did it. So this is what you should do. It's not a roadmap. It's not a manual. It's not the silver
Right.
bullet. It's none of that, right? But it
Right.
is a variety of different options that you have to create your own pathway, your
Mhm.
own journey. And so by telling our stories and sharing the resources and what we've experienced and how we've experienced it, the idea, at least for me, and I think maybe for you, but you can tell
Mhm.
me, is to just plant seeds, to give people ideas about the different options that are out there and things that they might explore, even things that I don't know about, you don't know about, that they will
Right.
know about, right? And that's really
Yes.
what we're trying to do with
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to do with
No,
talking to people
that's
about resources.
I'd say we're purely aligned. I mean, you're doing that through lifting up the stories that you're bringing forward, your own story and other people in your community.
Mm,
And, yeah, just the same intention. I think some of and we're early, we're still young. We launched again in last September, and
behind
so
you. You know that I'm younger than you are. That's all right. We got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of power here.
so so we have a nice collection of resources, and we have a whole queue that are coming up, and our intention is to really understand. We have like a matrix basically that's informed by survivors to help understand what is and what would be important to your healing, what kind of resources are most relevant. I'll tell you a little bit. Well, I'm going to circle back on how we get this feedback, but the content that take in the resource section, I'd say takes two or three forms. One would be just the very straightforward, "Hi, I'm an EMDR therapist, and this is when EMDR is helpful." We just published one on internal family systems, which I really, really find hyper relevant.
Yes.
Right? It's I
And
just
family constellations, I'm about to start doing some work with that. I'm super
oh, I didn't know
excited
about
about
that.
it.
Well, to the point that we don't know. right? What all's available. So I'm interested
Yes.
in following up on that. But yeah, so here's, internal family systems and here's how it works. And with every one of those resources, we make sure that there's something of an off ramp in the sense of saying, if you're
Mhm.
interested in learning more, here's where you can go. Here's some survivor stories that talk about survivors who've worked with this. Here's additional information in terms of links that you might go to. So you have the straightforward, here's talk therapy, here's IFS, here's EMDR. And then some of the articles that have been the most popular in the early days have been survivors who are writing about their experience as survivors when they have certain experiences like cancer, right?
Mhm.
How does being a survivor of sexual trauma show up as a cancer survivor?
Yeah.
And we have a really great piece on there about that. How does being a survivor show up when you encounter significant grief, right? I'm sure, and have thought a lot about just the grieving that's kind of a part of the healing process itself. Uh, so how does all that fit together, right? And just, we don't live life as survivors as that's our only identity, right? We also,
Mhm.
life happens to us. And I think oftentimes those intersections when we're running into life as a survivor who has had this additional experience, I think sometimes those are the most interesting. Um, so I think, it's a fairly broad array and becoming more broad. I wanted to mention to you how we think about our content and how we prioritize where we're going with that. On the
Mhm.
one hand, survivor stories we tend not to edit so long as they're in compliance with our code of conduct. So we're not going to hurt anybody. We're not being, racist or mean spirited in any way. Then we don't edit them because we want the survivor voice to be the
Mhm.
voice.
Mhm.
Um, on the other side of the equation, it is more curated, and the our past has been to be led exclusively by this group of young adult survivors as we co-created the site. And now some of those same young adult survivors are putting together a leadership team as part of Braver Collective, the organization, to continue to lead us forward, to help us think about what's useful on the site as it is today and where it adds value, what could be different. If there was something missing, what would that be? So we continue to use that as our primary lens to think about how to move both the organization and the digital experience forward,
Mhm.
the site and the social media. So we're just getting started.
Yeah, and I think, the work that you're doing to listen to survivors, and I love it that you keep referring to them as young adults and young people, younger than you and I
Mhm.
are, is great because my hope in reducing the impact of child sexual abuse is that we can minimize it, of course. Prevention and awareness
Yeah,
is, um, my real hope for let's
right.
just do away with it, right?
Yeah,
But, trauma and abuse are a human condition, and hurt people, and all those things we know will continue to be truths and realities because we are human beings. But getting people um, to where they're comfortable identifying what's happening to them at a young age and
mm,
going down that healing pathway immediately, as opposed to letting it sit inside of
yes,
them for so many years, like I did and like you did.
yes,
I feel like young people are in a place just to take action more quickly than I
right,
did, or more quickly than you might have. And
right.
so I do have a lot of hope when we give things like this to young people, and they're the ones that are crafting it and creating it, and what does the direction need to be. That gives me a lot of hope that it helps to shorten the cycle of suffering, right?
Yeah,
Between when you experience something and when you heal.
yeah. Thank you for saying that. I agree. It's the real driver of our choice, our decision to focus on young adults is just exactly what you said, that you and I are more the statistic. You
Yeah.
and I started getting really serious about working through my story in my early 50s, and a lot of people use the statistic that on the average survivors tell their story for the first time when they're 52, right? And maybe that's still valid, or maybe it's a little bit different than that. Um, but to your point, our hope is to come along, so, for all of us, right, in this community, all of our communities, to come along young adults before they form long-term relationships, before they
Mm,
have
yeah.
careers, before they just try to go out and navigate the crazy world, right? To begin to at least alter the trajectory of their understanding in their life just a little bit. And you just think about what's possible in terms of healing between, if I could have started when I was 20 instead of really jumping in deeply when I was 50,
Hmm.
how much, like, what's the opportunity uh, underneath
Awesome.
that curve?
It's huge. Yeah.
So yeah, that's very intentional, and I think that
Yeah.
I don't think we'll change our focus, even as we take responsibility for our whole community, right? That it needs to be relevant to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, and I do feel like the work that I'm doing is for all of us, but always in my mind and in my heart when I'm engaging with people and when I think about who I'm trying to reach, it's people who are younger than me. I mean, sometimes I feel like
Yeah,
in our age category and being a bit older, there are probably many of us that are maybe even just lost, right? It's not going to happen, right? Because
yeah,
of wherever we are in life, right? And the opportunity to heal isn't going to be there. And that breaks my heart. It's very
same.
sad to me. And because of that, so my hope that I'm pouring out is for all of us, but I'm really pouring out my hope for the young people where we can just help them to heal much more quickly and then just break the cycle, right?
Yeah,
Where that they're not hurting people
yeah,
anymore, right?
great. And I think you're right too, Beth. That I do think there's a very positive change culturally with younger folks, where
Mm,
they're much more quick to acknowledge the reality of sexual trauma in our culture, much more likely to start a conversation with a friend about it. Not like night and day, but I think just directionally, there's more of an openness. There's some, I think, lag effect from Me Too, which has really been helpful. And we want to just feed into all of that, right? That, yeah, give everybody the resources they need, so when they can begin to see this, they have a place to turn.
yes, yeah.
Hmm.
Coming back to that sense of community,
Exactly.
which is
Exactly.
so important for all of us. All right. So I do want to pause just for a moment and just give you an opportunity to talk about your healing journey. And I'm really the part that I'm most interested in. You've talked a little bit about it throughout this conversation, but the part of your journey that led you to take the pain to the purpose that got
Hmm.
you to the founding of Braver Collective.
Yeah. At the time, it was very unexpected, this pivot to go toward
Oh,
what has
I know
become,
that.
yeah, a lot of pivots probably, but definitely a pivot to move in the direction of Braver Collective. I was
Mm,
in a job I really, really loved, co-leading a digital design lab for a big bank in Chicago, of all things. And things were going really, really well. And I'd been in this therapy for maybe 8 or 9 years at this time. And when I watched The Gymnast and went through that experience and thought I just need to do something. And in hindsight, Beth, I think what I've learned happened with me that happens with many, many survivors. I think the vast, vast majority, actually, as we heal, is that as I needed to create space for all that's, present in me, all of the sadness and the grief and, just the reality of growing up in that experience,
mm,
I also created capacity, not just for myself, but really unbeknownst to me, capacity to be with other survivors, right? As they talk about their life and what they struggle with and what they encounter and how they think about healing and roadblocks they run into. And I talked to my therapist about this after a long time and said, "Hey, he's a trauma therapist. That's all he does." And I said, "Of all of the clients you have who are survivors of sexual trauma, as they go along, like what percentage of them get to a place where they really feel not just empathy with other survivors, but a sense of compassion, like a
Mm.
sense to do something,
Hmm.
they want to do something to be helpful?" He said like 95%. Now it's very unofficial, right? But my experience has been remarkably consistent with people
Mm.
who've really moved into their healing for a time, that they naturally not only again create a capacity, but a sense of compassion
Yes.
to try to be helpful. And that's what happened with me. It just, I mean, it was sprung on me in a sense, right? I wasn't expecting it. I didn't, it just happened. But it was so clear at the time that, I was 59. I had this amazing career and I just walked away from it, right? Which I did not anticipate doing. My wife did not anticipate me doing. It's been a massive gift and blessing. But at the time, it was just so unexpected.
So, how did it get sprung on you? Tell me about that.
I think, again, I kind of connect back to this whole like what happened with watching those gymnasts in that season right after that, those first few months after that. I just think that's for my whole life, which this is a little embarrassing to say, but I think for my whole life, I had just been focused on me primarily as it relates to the trauma. I was
Yeah.
just trying to like navigate my life,
As we do. Yes.
right?
As we do
Just
with
like
survivors.
live
Yes.
with it,
Yes.
be successful at work if I
Very
could,
common.
be a good dad, or all those priorities in my life. And I don't think I really understood like how healing actually works. I still think it's a little bit mysterious, you know, in terms of how it shows up. But when I turn my attention from myself to the other survivors, and I began to just read more and got curious about, you know, when we talk about prevalence, like exactly how many survivors are there, you know, and how many. I'll tell you something that is came out of that from a conversation the other day. I was talking to a team at a pretty prestigious college, university, that's responsible for supporting survivors who are students or student survivors. And one of the things we talked to them about was the fact that conservatively, 20% of their incoming first year students are survivors of sexual trauma. Imagine that, right? I
Mhm.
was. I walked onto campus, right?
Yes. Me too.
And, there's very little acknowledgement of that, very little done about that. And it's just one example of probably 20 you and I could come up with in short order, where once you start to look and you start to see how few resources are
Yeah.
present.
Yeah.
I was reading these books by Rachel Den Hollander, right? Uh, What is a Girl Worth? I read Chanel Miller's book, Know My Name. These people who are survivors who had public experiences, gymnasts and others. And I just knew, and I knew this much more clearly the more I just looked at the space, how difficult it was going to be for them to heal,
Yeah.
to find the resources they need, to overcome all the access challenges. And of course, these are people with means, right, and privilege. And how much more challenging must it be if you lack that privilege?
Mhm.
And I just was really overwhelmed with it. And I'd always been of the mindset that we find our place in the world by understanding what our particular toolkit is and then what the world most needs, right? And finding that intersection. And for me, all of a sudden, it was like I got hit over the head with a sledgehammer or something. It's like, oh my gosh, I know all about how difficult it is to heal as a sexual trauma survivor and all about what we've been talking about, the shame and the struggle. And I know how poorly we support survivors in our culture where we struggle to even have the conversation.
Mhm.
Things you can't talk about tend not to be heavily resourced, right?
Yes. That's
So
exactly
I
right.
just I just felt
Good subjects.
compelled. I just felt like I know we had this lab we were running. It was a digital design lab, and it was a group of designers specialty trained in something called human-centered design, which is really around going deep in understanding the people you're designing for and allowing their lived experience to and their desire to be a part of the solution to co-create the solutions for
Mm,
them, which
yeah,
gives you a lot more confidence it's going to be valuable to them.
yeah.
And I'm sitting there in this lab physically with my co-leader saying, this is what we should do. We should go out and talk to people in this space and figure out what's present that's working that needs to be lifted up, like your work, what's missing that we could think about, filling that gap. And we
Hmm.
just allowed the survivors and the survivor healing experts and so on to lead us toward what has become Braver Collective.
Yes.
And I'll say one more thing, Beth, on along those lines, and your point around linking Braver to your site is again in a massively under-resourced space. The last thing you want to do is waste time on doing something that's redundant.
Oh,
You want
100%.
to do right. What we all want to do is to find people that are doing really important work and lift it
Yes,
up,
and the
which
network.
is right.
Yes, we want that
Which is
network.
why
Absolutely.
that's what Braver is to a great degree. Is like
100%. Yep, yep.
your great work, Donna Jensen's great work, Ann Ream's great work, all these folks that are out there. But by virtue, a lot of this work, you're pretty digital, but a lot of the work is done face to face. It's
Mhm,
therapists and,
mhm,
it's nonprofit leaders and so on. And we wanted to come alongside them and both lift up their work and then also complement
mhm.
their work, right? So if you're a therapist, like I showed it to my therapist, showed the site to my therapist, whose name was Chris, about a month before we launched. And I said, okay, he's a very principled guy. So I said, you have to tell me the truth. What do you think? And he said, the first thing he said is, I'm going to share it with all my clients. And of course, I start like, getting emotional, but we talked about it and the why of that. And the why is that, the reality is, even if Chris is seeing someone like me once a week, which I went to see him once a week for years, it's 50 minutes a week. And then when I walked out that door, then where do I go? Where do I go to learn? Where do I go to find community?
Yes.
Where
It's
do
a
I go
lot
to
of minutes
share?
until next week, right?
Right? And whether you're a therapist, I mean, we're getting
Mhm.
feedback from therapists who are saying that's how they're using Braver. We're getting therapists from pastors. We're getting feedback from other nonprofit leaders not to lift up Braver Collective as like the solution. It's more just we need a
Yeah.
continuum
Yes.
of care
Yeah.
basically for each other.
Yes.
And we just want to be a part of that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. You used the word magical about how Braver Collective used to be and or how it came to be, and I would use the word spiritual.
Mm,
What I was thinking about when you were talking about that and those gymnasts, because I don't know, maybe you have met one or two, and maybe met I'm assuming you've not met them,
no, I have not.
but think about the ripple effect. So talking about coming out and telling our stories, the ripple effect of those gymnasts who you
Yeah,
heard them telling their stories, the impact on
can't
you.
even
You've
imagine.
never met them, and the work that the
Yeah,
organization you created, the ripple effect that you're having, people who you don't even know, right? And so I think about how the universe works, spiritually, how things work. And so those gymnasts went through something absolutely horrific. Everything that they went through, the
yeah,
events itself, everything they experienced trying to stand up for themselves, going through the legal process, every bit of that was
yeah,
traumatic for them, and pain for them. But their bravery stood them up to be able to share their stories. That's spiritual. And then here comes the universe having you being so impassioned by what you were hearing and what you were seeing, and look at what you've done, right? That is so
yeah.
cool to me how the universe
Oh,
works, that their experience in
totally.
part was so that you could launch Braver Collective, right? That's
Right.
so cool. The connectivity
It
that you
is.
have as
It is
beings is just
absolutely amazing.
amazing. It is really
Yeah.
cool.
And
Yeah.
of course, I've had, and I know you've had like 50 more of those experiences we
Oh,
could talk about,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Where
It's what I call the universe touches. So many of
Right.
them.
It
Yes.
just shows up, and I usually just start smiling because I know
Me
it's all
too.
meant to be.
Me too.
And I would also say, I want to get, I want to make sure we get some content fairly quickly on Braver about spirituality, because spirituality is such a common and important part of healing for so many, and it can take a lot of different forms, right? It's been very much a part of my own healing.
Mine
It
too.
was difficult for me to kind of reconcile some of what I learned when I was growing up to the experiences I had, but at the same time, it's fundamental to who I am and how I think about my life, and that's there's some great research. I think it's Dr. Lisa Miller who wrote a book documenting the work that she and her team had done around getting some real hardcore, uh, quality scientific research into correlating spirituality, like believing in a spiritual life and practicing a spiritual life with healing from
Yeah.
things like depression and
That's
anxiety and so on. And it is a freakishly high, almost hard to believe high correlation,
yes.
like way,
Yeah.
5 or 6
Yeah.
times the
It's huge.
alternative
Yeah.
approach kind of thing.
Yes.
So I'm still learning about that, but that's certainly been part of my experience.
Yeah, spirituality has been a huge part of my healing journey, and I've had some really profound healing experiences at the spiritual or soul level. So, in
Mm,
fact, the episode that I did for this series to honor Child Abuse Prevention Month now in April, my story that I've told is about healing my relationship with my grandfather who
mm,
passed away in 1994, and I didn't start the healing work. And so everything that I have done to heal that relationship has been spiritually and really probably at our soul level. And I've had some
yeah,
amazingly
mm.
powerful experiences that I have shared about. So I'm not going to give you, and I'm not giving anybody this the spoiler here. If you haven't listened to the episode,
Looking
you need to
forward
go
to
listen
it.
to it. So,
I
but
will
it's
for
yeah, and I've written about this. Part of it's in my book, and then I've written a couple of
Mhm.
blog posts about the two events that I had, significant events that happened after I finished writing the book that were entirely about healing and really releasing his soul is what the last part of it was about. So, I mean, it was phenomenal. So, and I mean, that is just like the healing aspect, but like I watched the universe move in my life and
Mm.
how different things happen. I mean, even meeting you, right? I mean, that is not
Yeah,
by coincidence. And I don't know, you're here today and where we're going in the next months or years. I
right.
have no idea, but it's just it's not by
Well,
coincidence.
the
I
good news
know
is we may
that
not be
is
in charge.
that is one thing I definitely know for sure. I am not in charge. And I will tell you that once I surrendered to the notion of me and self, and I
Mm,
surrendered to service in the universe, God, spirit, my life went in a completely
mm,
different trajectory to where I'm meant to be. I found my life's
mm,
purpose and I'm completely
mm.
living in my life's purpose now once I gave over that sense of I'm in control and
Yeah,
realizing that I'm absolutely not.
yeah. Well, it's visible, and I can see it working for you.
Yeah.
The other thing I think it my spiritual life did for me, Beth, was I needed to know that I was fundamentally okay, right? That there was the deepest part of me um, had not been abused, right? Was not damaged, and that's really that took quite a while for me to sort that out. But for me, I got there from a spiritual perspective and just
Yeah.
believing in who I was created to be, and knowing that this stuff happens to us, as you said earlier, but that doesn't alter who we fundamentally are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's game changer for me,
Yes.
right?
Yes, me too. And I think what you're describing there is the same thing that I've gone through. I mean, I'm the healing mentor. And
Yeah,
literally what that means, and to be a mentor means that you're offering people your life, your lived experiences is what
right.
you're sharing with them for to help
Mhm.
them, right? So what does that mean for me? Literally, it means that I was born to be a victim in moments in time when I was abused or traumatized. Then I lived as a survivor so I could have this amazing healing journey so I can share it as the healing mentor. right? And I've come to accept that 100%. But there was a long time in my life before I knew that and got to this place, probably in the same place you were, Ben, that questioning, like, spiritually, what is happening here? Like, I mean, even some
Yeah.
people may ask, why is God letting this happen to me? Well, I
Mhm.
clearly know why now. For me, you know why now for you as well, right? But there is that time I've experienced that when I questioned that, and it sounds like you have too. That reconciliation of what you know about God and universe. And for me, spirituality is ultimately about love. That's
Mm.
universally,
Oh,
that's what
yeah, yeah.
spirituality is about
Totally.
for me. And that
Yeah,
is what I believe it is. And that it's a little bit difficult to reconcile that and that notion and what I believe fundamentally with what I've actually experienced, right? Because
yes.
I've experienced a lot of stuff that wasn't love, anywhere near to
Yeah,
love, right? But
yeah.
I do understand that's my design to be
Mhm.
doing what I'm doing now, and I have completely accepted that as part of my spiritual journey.
Mm. Yeah, I do think it's curious, how often the people who, are involved in, like, the work that you're doing or we're doing and so on, and we're
Mm,
virtually all, like, coming from the place of our greatest pain and vulnerability, and now we're being, like, really publicly, vulnerable, which I just again, I thought that would be the very last thing on earth I would do, I thought 5 years ago, whatever. But the reality is, I just think that no matter what happened to us, and we can debate why it happened to us, but for sure, no matter what happened to us, it can be used for good.
yes,
I
absolutely.
just totally believe that. And
I
I've
do too.
seen 1,000 examples. We all do.
Me too. Me too.
And that's
All
true for everybody.
yes,
That's not just true for you and I, right?
that's right. Everybody who's listening to this or watching this, that is 100% true.
Yeah. And that
And
doesn't excuse what happened,
oh,
right?
no,
And there's
no,
accountability and
absolutely.
all of that.
Oh,
But
100%.
but from
Yes,
but can this be used for good to help each other, to
yes.
lead a more fulfilled life? Absolutely.
Yeah,
Mm.
100%. Yeah, it's a real sense of purpose and understanding, like knowing why I'm here on this earth, and it's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing to come to. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great. So, all right, that is a good place for us to wrap up on a high note,
Awesome.
positive there. So, so you have mentioned bravercollective.org and your social media handles. I am
Yep.
going to post those
Thank you.
in the show notes so that people will have ready access to that. And I am going to I'm going to get Braver Collective linked to my website, and I'm a little bit shocked that I haven't already done that. But in giving myself some
Everything at
grace
once.
there, I've been busy. There's
Right.
been a lot
You
going
have been
on.
busy in a great
Yes,
way.
yes,
No,
yes.
thank you, Beth. Thank you so much for the chance to talk, and thanks for sharing so much of your story. Really, y
Delightful to have you, and I'm really happy that we made this happen, and I know we're gonna continue to do some great things together.
let's do it.
Yeah, all right. All right, everyone, that concludes today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones, and you know what I'm gonna say to you. Come on, everyone, let's heal. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. And if you'd like to know more about me and my work to help other survivors to heal, please visit me on the web at empoweredsurvivors.com.